a very humorous slide, but unfortunately a fairly accurate reflection of my life that has been turned upside down over the last 2.5 years, as I have had to come to grips with numerous state and federal legislations, environmental impact statements from the companies, their environmental management plans, environmental authorities that have been issued by the environment departments, as well as getting our basic education in geology, hydrogeology, engineering, and the list goes on and on. So yes, I am a farmer and I'm from Cecil Plains, and Cecil Plains basically is Toowoomba's backyard. We're about 80 kilometres due west. And the Cecil Plains floodplain is widely regarded as some of the most valuable cropping land in the world. With our mild climate and our beautiful black fertile soils, we're able to grow 2 crops every year, water permitting basically. We can do anything. But unfortunately, 2.5 years ago, my husband and myself were approached by Arrow Energy, which is the coal seam gas company that has tenure over this inner Darling Downs floodplain, and they proposed to do what they call a 6-well pilot with an associated 40 megalitre holding pond for the produced wastewater. The 2 images that you can see there, in the bottom of the overhead or the aerial photo is the actual proposed site on my farm where they wanted to do the 6-well pilot. The other image is of a 5-well pilot just to the west of Cecil Plains in some timbered country. It was immediately apparent to my husband and myself that the company had absolutely no idea of that it was a floodplain. They had no idea of our current land use, of our land values, as it was the very first fairly major foray of any of the 4 major companies in Queensland onto this intensive irrigated cropping country. So what is coal seam gas? Basically, coal seam gas is methane that's trapped in coal seams at depths between 200 and 800 metres underground. In the Cecil Plains area, the coal seam gas is at a depth of between 300 and 500 metres. And it's trapped there by water pressure, essentially. And the coals may be undesirable, I suppose, for open cut or underground, but certainly there's enough methane there for them to be attractive for coal seam gas industry activity. So in order to get the gas out, the companies drill a well down, they remove the water, which lowers the pressure and mobilises the gas so that it can flow. And the hope is that it finds the quickest route to the surface, and hopefully that's up the well where it can be captured and obviously converted into energy. The major coal-bearing formations in Australia are located in Queensland and New South Wales, and this is where we will see the most of the coal seam gas activity in Australia. In Queensland, there are 4 major coal seam gas to liquid gas projects. 3 of those have already received their relevant state and federal approvals, and they are in the construction phase. They're off and going. The 4th project is the Arrow Energy project, which is a 50-50 joint venture between PetroChina and Royal Dutch Shell, and it is Arrow that holds the tenure over that intensive cropping country. Arrow's EIS says that 50% of their tenure is good quality agricultural land / strategic cropping land. So what are the benefits? Well, the state government has said that they expect that the activities of these 4 major proponents in Queensland will generate some 18,000 jobs. Most of those are associated with construction, and therefore they are not permanent jobs. And that also, once they start selling the gas, basically the industry will provide $850 million in additional revenues to the state. But what are the impacts of coal seam gas? And I've gotten this list from Arrow's EIS, so no one can accuse me of being biased. So obviously the air, water and terrestrial environmental impacts are at the fore, and the associated physical, biological and social impacts relating to those. The draw of skilled labour from other industries is highlighted in the EIS as a significant impact, and for someone who is in another industry and who is surrounded by coal mines and CSG activities, even though it's not in my community at this point in time, we've been noticing that draw in labour for the past 10 years. Changes to the rural lifestyle and atmosphere, because unlike coal mines which buy out the landholders, coal seam gas actually occupies the same space as the previous existing land use. So that's a significant impact to those that are going to bear the cost of this industry. Increased demand on local, regional infrastructure and services, including our road infrastructure, medical and communications. And of course, diversion of labour, not only from agriculture, but also the diversion of land and capital expenditure from other businesses and industries as well, have been identified by Arrow as impacts of their activities. In 2006, the Queensland Government released an issues paper on the co-produced water of the CSG industry at a domestic level in Queensland. In 2006, we only had a domestic industry. And the major findings of that paper were that although the coal seam gas industry represents significant economic benefits to the state that were undeniable, it was important to note that the industry must develop without unintended consequences and a legacy of unfunded liabilities for future generations. So we shouldn't just be going in holus bolus without doing our homework. A crucial one for me is that it's the duty of the public service to protect the public interest, not the interest of the industry. And flowing on from that, that it's invalid to assume that the promotion of the industry is automatically in the public interest without giving regard to other competing things that might also be in the interest of the public as well. This one's fairly key, that every proposed development should be evaluated in advance before issue of an authority to prospect. So these were the findings of an interdepartmental state government document that came out in 2006 ahead of an export industry in Queensland. And I'm just going to read this because this is a quote from that same document. It says, "The current practice of not considering public interest criteria other than the promotion of the industry has the potential to create anger in the community and to mire the state government into authorising developments that it later finds to be unacceptable but irreversible except by payment of large quantums of compensation." And unfortunately, in 2012, I can assure you that the state government, whether it was the previous Labor government or not is irrelevant, has ignored all of that advice that I previously gave. They mentioned they are issuing ATPs without doing baseline environmental assessments. They are incorrectly assuming that only the development of this industry is in the public interest, and on we go. So this is an aerial image of my community. My farm is located on that map, and what I have done is I've put a red dot at every 800 metre square intervals. Can you see that? Yep. Because that's the level of development that we anticipate that we will see in our community if this coal seam gas industry and this particular project by Arrow is approved. This part of the world has a geological structure underlying it called the Harain Trough, which is highly prospective for coal seam gas development. Arrow Energy's CEO has told me personally that that area contains somewhere between 25 and 40% of all of Arrow's coal seam gas reserves in their Surat Gas project area. But it's important to note that we're not talking about half a volleyball court here, as the industry might have you believe in their glossy page, large, full page ads in the newspapers. The construction footprint for these well pads is anywhere from half a hectare to a full hectare, and along with the wellheads you have the roads leading to the wellheads, you have the buried infrastructure, the gas gathering lines, you have overhead power lines, signage, marker posts, high and low point risers, and that's just gas field development. Strategic cropping land legislation will prevent Arrow Energy from constructing their larger development on the floodplain, but these would include dams, compressor stations, high pressure pipelines, etc., etc. So this is not some little happy half a volleyball court development. This is a significant change in the current landscape in rural Queensland. So just some background figures. 80% of Queensland's land surface is occupied by agriculture in one form or another, but 96% of that 80% is taken up by livestock and grazing enterprises. Only 3.2% of Queensland's land surface is used for cropping, 3.2%. And of that 3.2%, only 8% of that 3.2% is under irrigation. So our intensive irrigation cropping areas in our state are very rare and precious resources. 22% of Queensland is under either a petroleum exploration licence or a production lease. So obviously when you look at those statistics as a whole, there's obviously going to be a significant part of our state where you are having agriculture and coal seam gas attempting to occupy the same space. So is coexistence possible? I will tell you right now that the coal seam gas industry is not a sustainable industry. This industry produces significant volumes of produced water, which is largely salty, and we are talking about hundreds of thousands of millions of litres of water per annum over the life of these projects that contain hundreds of thousands of tonnes of salt. So that level of extraction of groundwater is unsustainable, and this has been publicly stated by this Queensland government. So I'm going to completely ignore that when I discuss with you, is coexistence possible? And I'm going to focus solely on the coexistence of the competing or the associated land uses being agriculture and CSG. In order to answer that question, you can't, well, sorry, I'll go back a bit and say that there have been sweeping statements made by industry and government in Queensland to say that agriculture and CSG industry can coexist. I find that particularly offensive personally, because it's not factual, it's not based on any fact whatsoever, there've been no studies done. And we have to consider that whilst the coal seam gas industry is fairly uniform over its extent in the Surat Basin, it extends roughly from Dalby to Roma. Coal seam gas is coal seam gas. There's reasonably only one way that you can do it, so each company is sort of acting in the same way. But over that same area, we have multiple different permutations and variations in agriculture, ranging from rangeland grazing on a broad scale. We've got broadacre dryland cropping. We have intensive animal husbandry enterprises, and we have intensive irrigation cropping enterprises, and of course combinations of all of those as well. So it is inappropriate to say that agriculture and coal seam gas can coexist without actually analysing coal seam gas's impacts on all of those various types of agriculture and permutations of. In my opinion, there may well be areas where agriculture and coal seam gas can coexist, and I would think the more extensive versions of the agriculture may be able to coexist with coal seam gas. However, it's been my personal experience and something that I have noted that the more opposition that there is to coal seam gas within an agricultural community, it seems to be directly correlated to the level of risk that those communities are expected to bear. So therefore, the more intensive the land use, the more concerned and more resistive those communities are, and quite frankly, the more incompatible the land uses appear to be. Secondly, the more reliant a landholder or a community is on groundwater, again, the more opposition and resistance, because the more risk they are going to bear. The recently reported draft Queensland Water Commission document said that half of all the water that will be extracted by this industry will be coming from overlying and underlying aquifers. So it's not just the balloon aquifer that is at risk, it is the ones overlying and underlying as well. And thirdly, those communities that will bear the greatest social impacts are the most resistive as well. And one that comes to mind are the Tara rural residential estates, but also in my community where we are a floodplain that is naturally treeless, and we're highly developed for an agricultural area, so our neighbours are close by. So unfortunately for me and my community, we have the trifecta there where we have an intensive land use, that we're groundwater dependent, and it's going to come at a significant social cost, and obviously therefore we suffer the highest risk, I guess, if coal seam gas industry comes into our area, and of course that's why we are vocally opposed to it at this point in time. I recently, only in the last couple of weeks, read a newspaper article where someone from the industry was saying that it is crucial for Australia to be developing our coal seam gas industry, because we will be supplying this energy to these energy-starved Asian countries, namely China and India, because they have an emerging middle class with all of this extra cash. They want to buy appliances for their kitchens and they want to be able to power them. I found that a remarkable comment, considering what's the point of buying electrical appliances if you don't have the food to put in the fridge? The United Nations has estimated that global food production will have to increase by 50% by 2030 if we plan to continue feeding ourselves, and that global food production must increase by must double by 2050 if we're going to keep ourselves fed. But the United Nations also estimates that over that same period of time, there will be a 25% in loss of global food production by 2050 as well. And the reason for that is climatic factors, the loss of agricultural land and water scarcity. So, this is my last slide, and you can read this slide while I speak. What are we to do about this? Well, firstly, I think the governments, and it might be too late for Queensland, but certainly it may not be too late for New South Wales, we need to start heeding our own advice, and absolutely we should not be issuing tenure over any part of our states without first doing the relevant baseline environmental assessments to determine whether it's actually appropriate to be issuing tenure in those areas. There needs to be the mindset that it's not necessarily the public interest is not necessarily served through the continual approval and development of our fossil fuel resources. And on a more personal level, if you guys think that this is just an issue for farmers at Cecil Plains or people who live in the bush and it's not a problem for you, then you really do need to think again, and you really do need to take heed of what I've been saying, I suppose, and become involved in this. Because if you plan to be around in 2030 or 2050, and if not, if you've got children or grandchildren that you'd like to actually be able to eat in 2050, then this is an issue that concerns you as well. It is undeniable that we are expecting our farmers to produce more and more food off of less and less land with less and less water. And there comes a point where that's just not going to keep being sustainable. It's just not going to work. So we need to completely change our mindset, and we need to treasure our agricultural resources of food and water, absolutely paramount. And I would invite all of you to get involved in this issue and support us in our fight, and thanks very much for listening.